The question you have to ask yourself is, how valuable is gold? If you're like me, you've been raised believing that gold is the most valuable mineral resource known to man. Um, and maybe if you're a little bit younger, you're like, oh, I've heard that platinum is more valuable. But certainly we all understand that nobody values diamonds anymore. Um, what does this have to do with selling books? It has everything to do with selling books because until you recognize the value of what you've created, you don't stand a chance at creating buzz around that or a brand for yourself that anybody is going to care about. So today, I'm going to do an episode and talk to you about 5 things that you can do right now to increase your value. I'm not a huge fan of the 5 things you can do list, but other people are. And part of creating value, if I'm jumping forward, is to apply specificity and align visions. That's 2 parts of 5. I totally just spoiled things. Anyways, I'm live and I do this because I believe that there is value to you in catching a live stream and there's value to us in having a conversation. So during this episode, if you happen to tune in and you're listening and you want to ask a question, drop it in the comments. I will pause everything I'm doing and respond to you because I think that there's value in conversation. So right now, I want to start with the idea of gold and build the connective tissue around value. Gold is a commodity that all of us have decided is valuable. We put it in wedding bands, we put it in necklaces, in jewelry, we put it in different types of technology that we use. Gold has some inherent value in the fact that it is useful in certain technological resources at this point, but gold in and of itself is not valuable. And there are a limited number of resources out there that have great value. We just happen to like the look of gold. We like how shiny it is. We like how malleable it is. And it does some pretty cool things. You can literally pound gold down into a foil and you can coat an object. It has an ability to spread very widely, very thinly, and still create an appearance of being 100% gold. It's a really cool thing, but we continue to discover more of it as time goes. You can dig into the earth. You can find a gold deposit, you can mine that gold deposit, you can take it into your personal war chest of belongings, and you can gain value in the eyes of others by doing this. What happens when you find more gold is that all the gold in the world becomes slightly less valuable. You'd have to strike a major finding to actually impact how people would value the global resources of gold. But generally speaking, it is actually possible. We could also wake up one day and decide that gold has no value. We could wake up one day and decide that dirt has value. In some ways, we do value dirt. Better dirt grows better crops. Anything has value when you recognize what it is. And so if you start to understand this, you start to understand that the things that you do produce value and not the other way around, not the thing itself, but the way that you use the thing. That is what creates the value. Joe says the gold shows on TV keep me so engaged. I find gold mining so interesting. I do as well, Joe. Gold is particularly fascinating. And it's something that has captured my mind for all of my life. I want to have things that are rare and precious. Growing up in my household, my mom was always somebody who looked for things that were considered valuable in the eyes of the world, and things were more valuable to her if they were rare. She was an antique collector, and our house was full of antique furniture because of that. Pieces, dressers, mirrors that were thousands of dollars just because someone had decided that this was an authentic antique created by somebody who was worth talking about. So let's start talking now about the 5 different things that can create value and increase your value to others around you. So the first one we've already talked about is you need to recognize rarity. I'm going to use the example that I have been playing with recently when I am traveling around the country selling my books at comic expos. Recognizing rarity means that if I sign every single book that I hand over to somebody to read, the value of my signature goes down every time I sign a book. That's something that I have to think long and hard about. There are authors out there, there are artists out there who intentionally withhold their signature for all but the most rare of opportunities. And they know that if they do that, the value of the things that they sign will have more weight in the market. Now, that's something that you can do just to create the sense of rarity that's needed for people to really value your signature. Something interesting about that, though, is that those people who are conscious about how many signatures they put out into the world, they don't actually gain any of the economic benefit for that value. And that's totally fine because there's something deeper going on. And maybe you've never thought about this before. When somebody doesn't sign their art, their books, whatever they're creating regularly, then they become known as a person with their signatures. And that increases their value by giving them the aura of somebody who's conscious and thoughtful about the way that they interact with the world. It increases their brand value. I hate the word. I still hate talking about people as brands because it's one step removed from us being a number. But the idea is that you do something and that recognition of rarity actually increases how people value you in the broader sense. Just like gold, if that person lives long enough, their signatures on items are going to increase and the overall value of those items will decrease. If I sign one copy of my first edition, The 9 Lives of Marv DeLonghi, then that book will have extreme value. But if somebody comes around and I decide that there's a good reason to sign a second copy of the first edition of The 9 Lives of Marv DeLonghi, I just cut the value of it in half because now 2 people can have it. And something that's one of a kind is probably even more than 2 times as valuable as something that's 2 of a kind. But when I'm going to shows, I don't worry about the signatures. I don't worry about the signatures because that's a selling point for me. Some people will talk to me for a little while and they say, your book sounds really good. I'll buy it if you'll sign it for me. I've never tested before saying, no, I don't actually sign my books, but you'll still really enjoy reading them. Maybe they would buy the book. Maybe I could lean into that and recognize that the value of the book is just as great without my signature on it from an entertainment perspective. But right now, I'm trying to get more readers, and I can only be in one place at one time. So I'm happy to sign as many books as people move my direction. What I have tried to play with that's a very similar concept is I'm doing a print run of a novella that I wrote called Mountain McJonesy and the Butterfly Dragon. And I'm able to create that book and print it through Amazon very inexpensively. I could do as many copies as I wanted. But what I have decided to do to create a sense of value is that every 100 copies of that book, I change the cover artwork and I reprint it with new cover artwork. So there will never be more than 100 copies of that novella out in the world with the same cover. That's a way that I can actually talk to people and say, hey, if you like this book, you can throw it into my 3-book deal for just another $5, really inexpensive. It's a quick upsell to get me a teeny bit more money. But then I can also tell them, this book that you're seeing right now, you like that cover? There's only 100 of them in the entire world, and there will never be more. That's a fun way to create value by recognizing rarity. You can do something similar. You can play with the idea of doing cover updates and new editions of your books to create value. And it's especially effective when you're not selling as many books because you don't have to worry about the logistics of mass printings. But it's something in the early going that can increase your personal value, something you can do right now that will add value to what you're doing. And that does go on to the next idea. This is similar but different, and that is creating scarcity. So that's the second side of the coin. When I print Mountain McJonesy and the Butterfly Dragon and I only do 100 copies with the same cover, then I immediately create scarcity. That book can now trade with anybody who has it to anybody else who has it. And so in years to come, there is a finite resource of Mountain McJonesy and the Butterfly Dragon that you can tap into and trade among yourselves, and that will increase its overall value. The power of scarcity is something that leverages a lot of different arms of your brand. When you are scarce, then the opportunity to have access to you elevates massively. Gold, the idea that it is a scarce resource means that people fight over it and the possession of it, the holding of it. If you hold that gold, you have the power. The same is true if you do a printing of books with a unique cover. Hold that, and people value it and trade it, and they talk about you. Scarcity creates conversation. So if we think about rarity, rarity might not create conversation. Rarity might create longing. It might create a leverage, but scarcity creates conversation. When you are scarce, people talk about you. Think about what they did in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for people who enjoy superhero movies. 2 years ago, Marvel released more content in a calendar year than they ever had by 3, 4, even 5-fold. If you look at the total hours that they pumped out that year, it's insane. And in just 1 year's time, they went from being the most valuable property known to man to being on the precipice of total collapse. So what did Marvel do? They recognized their situation, they pulled back, and they created scarcity. How many Marvel movies are coming out in 2024? Just one. Deadpool and Wolverine. I think it's on the eve of release right now. And if you see the conversation that's happening, if you hear the discussion around that movie, it's like a whole other thing. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is literally calling himself the savior of Marvel. He's calling Deadpool the savior of Marvel. And I think that he recognizes not only had he created something valuable in and of itself in Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2, but now he gets the opportunity in this movie with a great deal of leverage, being a writer, being a creative voice in it, to build his brand as saving a many billions of dollars industry with this one scarce resource. They're going to just put one movie out this whole year in 2024, and it's going to be his movie. Scarcity creates conversation. Had there been another Marvel movie earlier in the year, we wouldn't be talking like we are. We wouldn't be saying the things that we're saying. Scarcity is the conversation. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to apply specificity. This is the third thing. It's really easy to do, and it's easier to get wrong because specificity can be misunderstood. I'll use the example. Recently, I posted an afterthought on Instagram. I got the idea from Gary Vaynerchuk, and he put out a book recently. I'd recommend to any of you who want to learn a little bit more about how to use social media organically. I think that at the very least, his book, Day Trading Attention, can start to give you new ideas about how to create content and what it takes to create good content. And at the very most, it may turn your brand into something legitimately huge. I've gained a lot from it. I've read it several times now, a couple times by audiobook, a couple times by ebook, really trying to dig deep into what he's talking about. And he had mentioned this idea that one of his most popular videos early on was him just getting in front of the camera and talking about how he loved blueberries. I've tried that a little bit in different ways. Never quite like I did this last week, but I'll oftentimes put in little posts here and there about my love of the Chicago Cubs. Huge fan. I cried when they won the 2016 World Series. They are a world for me that I just grew up with, and they mean so much to me. I think I have some fans out there of my work that first met me through my Cubs fanship, but nothing like what happened this week. This week, I was working, and my son came into my office, knocked on the door, said, "What's up, buddy?" And he said, Mom was gone. And he said, Mom said that I could have some banana apple muffins, but I just wanted to make sure that you agreed. Uh, and I went over to him and I said, "Hey, buddy, if Mom tells you something's okay, it's just the same as if Pop told you something's okay. There's no difference. We share ideas, we share the same voice, we share the same values. So when she says yes, it's just like Pop saying yes." That was the whole conversation. And I recognized that as being one of the better dad moments that I'd had in recent memory. And so I decided to just get in front of my camera and tell the story basically how I just did, and post it as a reel on Instagram. And right as we speak, I think it has um, 19,000 views and 208 likes. Yeah, I mean, I'm following it. I'm responding to all the comments. It's miles bigger than my next best post. I mean, miles. It has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with my books. It doesn't tell people about the Nine Lives of Margaret Longhide, the Luke in Time Mysteries, Buckshot Blast and the Goldfish Getaway, Mountain McJonesy, and Butterfly Dragon. Nothing. It doesn't connect to those in a real way, but it does get me some attention. And I bet you that there are people who have clicked on my profile and at least like checked out a couple of my other reels. I'm not aware of any sales that I've gotten from that video at 19,000 views. That's not particularly surprising because we have to think about value in terms of much bigger numbers. Joe says Cubs promotion of minor league pitching is going to make 25, 26 great. 2 Razorbacks, that's non-biased. Joe is a huge Arkansas Razorbacks fan, and his appreciation of the Arkansas Razorbacks has made me like them more. His appreciation of the Orioles has made me like them more. This is the power of you loving something, is that by association, other people start to like it. I didn't even really care about the Orioles. I couldn't name any players outside of Manny Machado when he played for them and Cal Ripken Jr. for the Orioles for a really long time. The Cubs just didn't cross paths with them, but now I have a friend who likes them, and they're a pretty big deal to me. Same with the Buffalo Bills. I had a friend named JP who was a massive Buffalo Bills fan. I had a void in the NFL, and so I didn't really think about a team to root for. Kind of like Tom Brady. I still really like Tom Brady. Not kind of. I mean, my affection for him grew, and it happened through this exact channel that we're talking about. Here is specificity for you. I hated the Patriots and I hated Tom Brady. And I was a huge hater on Deflategate and that whole thing. I thought that they were cheaters and down low losers. And then Tom Brady appeared on Armchair Expert podcast. Dax Shepard is the host. Pretty much everybody in the world knows about it. So if you're one of those who doesn't and you enjoy interviews with famous people, give it a go. It's pretty great. So Tom Brady was a guest on Dax Shepard's podcast, and they had a really fun, engaging conversation. I learned a lot about Brady that I never knew about before. And by the end of that interview, the fact that he and Dax got along really well made me like him a little bit more. And so I found myself looking up different videos about him, reading about him, and paying close attention to the kind of human being that he was. And what I learned was he wasn't a top pick. He wasn't somebody that people really thought for sure was going to be great at the NFL level. It reminds me a little bit of the current Broncos quarterback. They think is going to be their franchise quarterback. There are a lot of people who don't expect much from him, Bo Nix. And so I'm interested to see what will happen. He did end up going pretty high in the draft, but it was a huge surprise. Brady didn't go super high in the draft, and nobody expected him to be a starting quarterback, much less arguably the greatest NFL player of all time. When I learned about his work ethic and his rise to success, that became for me something to hold on to and to aspire to and admire. And when I see people do the greatness journey at that level, I can't help but be drawn to them. So love the Patriots, hate the Patriots, love the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, hate the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It no longer matters. I was a fan of any team that he played for. That's the power of association. Razorbacks, my friend Joe likes them, so now I like them. Orioles, same thing. Joe likes them, so now I like them. Now, I'm never going to root for the Orioles to beat the Cubs or to win the World Series if the Cubs are in the conversation, but you better damn believe that I'm going to cheer for them and pay close attention to them if they're in the playoffs and the Cubs aren't. That's pretty cool that you can actually create a value system in the people that like what you like. And you need to use that carefully. The other side of this in creating specificity is if you apply it incorrectly, you will confuse the people who are going along with you. The best example I can think of is when you engage with somebody as an author and the only thing you talk about are movies, you may think that you are creating a connection with them and you may be creating an easier way to converse, but you are not creating value for yourself by doing it. When you find what they value, then they draw closer to you through themselves. You add to their value. When you are able to compel them to try something that they've never tried before, blueberries, watching Orioles baseball, something like that, you're the one gaining the value. And so being careful about specificity. If you tell the world about how you parent your children, then you want to be prepared to take that moment if it catches and people are paying attention. And then you need to move that into your world. Don't talk about a movie. Don't try to find a commonality. Try to create a sense of value in the ideal and move them toward you. That specificity then gives you the value. And that sounds mercenary in a way. It's not really mercenary. It's you changing your perspective. It's you shifting your lens and starting to look at, these are all the things at my disposal right now. These are the things that I know. I can create a Dennis Johnson fan for those of you who don't know him, and that's going to be pretty much everyone. Dennis Johnson is an author who wrote a short little book called Jesus' Son. I actually have it right here on my shelf. It's one of a handful of books that is within my sightline all day long because I value it so greatly. Dennis Johnson pulled a Norm Macdonald. Actually, he's the original Norm Macdonald. He died of cancer some years back, and nobody but his wife and his doctor knew that he even had cancer. He never spoke of it publicly. And when he passed away, it was made known just through a short press release. That was his kind of ethos in the world, is that he kept his public persona bay and he let his book speak for him. He changed lives with his books. I know many people who love his books. My friend Orville is the one who introduced me to him. And I loved that book that he gave me so much, the copy that I just showed you of Jesus' Son, that I intentionally never gave it back. I stole it. I stole the book. Now, I'm a good guy, so I did buy an equivalent copy off of Amazon, and I gave it back to him. And as far as he knows, he got his book back. I know it's unethical. That's kind of part of my brand. I'm always towing the line. Specificity matters. I can create a Dennis Johnson fan by talking about Jesus' Son. I can talk about the stories, why they mean something to me. And if you've never heard of him before, there's a chance that you might check him out if you're inclined to read. And when I do that, if you like that book, you don't attribute it to Dennis Johnson, you attribute it to me. That's specificity. He wrote the book, I get the credit. That's specificity. Use it wisely. Create around yourself value by being careful about the things you recommend. And that doesn't mean don't gush. That doesn't mean don't love. It doesn't mean don't review books. It doesn't mean even that you can't say something is better than it is. And this probably goes well with my brand. There are people that I know right now who have written books and that I've read those books and found them wanting. Maybe not my favorite books on Amazon. I still probably post a 5-star review. It takes a certain kind of violation of my like small ethical code for me to not give it 5 stars. It really has to just look like a lazy attempt for me to not do that. But I don't talk about those books. I don't share about those books outside of that review. I am trading in relationship at that point. But a book like Jesus' Son, a book like Infinite Jest, those are books. I was recently on a podcast talking about David Foster Wallace, and I get the credit for being the David Foster Wallace fan, so I can go there. I get the credit for being the dad who is unified with his son. Now, can I move that toward the themes in my books? You better believe it. You better believe it. there becomes a point in a conversation where the post that I put on Instagram starts getting comments. And as people talk, maybe I look for an opportunity to be like, that's crazy that you mentioned that. That's a theme that I thought a lot about when I was writing The 8-Ball Magic of Susie Q, whatever book it might be. And then that's a moment where I get to tether that specificity to something that I've done, and that creates more value. I'm going to move on because I'm going long right now. I want you to take ownership. And I guess we have actually been leaning into that already, is taking ownership of the things that you're doing, taking ownership of the way that you're out in the world. But the more important thing, and this is the big move that you can make today. So even though it's the fourth point, it's probably the biggest thing that you can do today, is recognize owning your value. I would say that of everybody I know right now, all of them that I am personally engaged with on a regular basis, Joe Radke, this is for you as well. You don't own your value enough. And I'd like you to ask a question. If you're out there and you're working a job, making money that somebody else is paying you, that you're not, like a small business unto yourself. And if you are a small business, but really, if someone's paying you, when is the last time that you asked your boss for a raise? When's the last time you went in and said, hey, I've been doing this job. I've been doing this job at a higher level, and I believe that I deserve a raise. That's taking ownership. Take ownership of the situation, recognize your value, and ask the world to value you based on your merits. The equivalent to that as a business owner is, where do you price your books? For this, I would give you the example of every time I'm at a show, people have wildly different prices for their books. Same size, same number of pages, probably printed with Amazon KDP. So we're all paying the same amount for paper and glue and all that kind of stuff. Shipping, the whole 9 yards. It's the same across the board. One person charges $15 for their book, another charges $20. Some people charge as much as $30 for a book. I learned this from David Joel Stevenson, that I was leaving money on the table when I was in Oklahoma. I'd been charging $18 for a book. He's like, why not just round it up to 20? Nobody's going to care. And I didn't believe him. And that's because I hadn't taken ownership for the value of what I was doing. Possibly there was some thought about like what I would pay for a book, and that can get in the way, because that's ignoring ownership. What I would say is the things you create are valuable, and taking ownership means taking ownership for the whole process as well, by the way. If you're out there right now and you're an author, if you're out there right now and you're working for Red Bull, and you know that you could be doing something better, if you know that you are cutting corners, if you know that you could ask a store owner to give you another display and you feel too tired to do it, if you know that you're leaving effort, energy, and value on the table, then you may be actually accurately assessing your value. And you can take ownership of that as well. And you can choose to either change it or accept where you're at and say, this is what I'm comfortable with. Because that's part of taking ownership too, is saying, as cool as it would be in an ideal world to be Stephen King or Steven Spielberg, all the Stevens, the amount of work that it's going to take to get there is mind-numbing. It's like oblivion, walking into a hurricane, walking into a tornado. There's so much work that goes into getting to that place, and a good deal of luck. But take ownership of the fact that nobody gets lucky who doesn't show up, and showing up requires varying levels of energy. If you want to be Stephen King, you should expect that you're going to have to neglect a lot of other things in your life to get to that level. You're going to deserve things. Deserve. It's a weird word. You're going to deserve things that you don't get. And you just have to keep showing up until luck spins your way. A lot of people do the hard work, just not long enough. A lot of people get screwed over and they duck their head because they're tired of getting crapped on. I've done it many, many times in my life. I've done previous episodes of this podcast where I have admitted that my current level of effort is not going to get me to the Stephen King level. And I've reflected deeply on what I want in terms of that. But taking ownership does mean that when you spent the money to properly edit a book, when you've spent the money to get the right cover, when you've spent the money to get the distribution, when you've spent the money to go to a show, when you've spent the money to get in front of an audience, whatever it might be, the energy, the effort, all of the many, many things that it requires to be in a place, then value what you have at the level that it is valuable. And then ask yourself the question, if you sell a book for $15, Christopher Talon, hopefully you're listening. If you sell your book for $15, then people value the book at $15. If you sell your book for $20, then people value your book for $20. I haven't talked about this, but I was just at Capital City Comic-Con in Lansing, Michigan with my friend Christopher, and he was selling his book right next to me. We were at the same table. He had a section, I had my section. People would say, how much are these? He would say minus 15, his are 20. And I don't believe I lost a single sale for it. And I do believe that there were people, when they assessed his book and assessed my book, thought like, why is his 20 and his is 15? There was a real conversation that happened in their head. I can't tell you what it was, but I can tell you that they still bought mine. And so what I know with relative certainty is that when they walked away, they had higher expectations of my work. And I'm okay with that. I'm fine with you having higher expectations. The competitive part of me believes that those expectations are going to be surpassed and you're going to be like, that was a really, really good deal. It's going to be a great deal for Chris too. I love his book. Switchers is a lot of fun. But I think that he left value on the table. I tried to encourage him to sell his for 20. He was scared of it. I don't think he values himself as highly as he should. Or maybe he knows that he didn't put something out there that was up to his level. Now, that's the thing too, is that you can have more talent and you can grow in talent over time. What I'm able to do today as a writer is not what I'll be able to do in 20 years as a writer. But that doesn't mean that I'll put out a better product. You can actually get better at something and still do worse. If you let off the gas pedal, if you're Tom Brady and you decide you're not going to give it your all in an exhibition game, chances are you're going to look more like Russell Wilson, 2022 Russell Wilson. So that is the fourth point. The last one is align visions. This one always gets on people's nerves. People hate this because it feels like you're a sellout when you align visions. I can't tell you enough that it's not selling out. And here's a good example going back to the Cubs, since we've talked a little bit of baseball. I can align visions with people by choosing whom I speak about when I talk about the Cubs. So the Cubs have been around since the late 1800s. They've actually been the Chicago Cubs since the early 1900s. And there are a litany of players who have come through their major league team. If you're of a certain age, the name Sammy Sosa means more to you than any other Chicago Cub. If you're of another age, the name Ryan Sandberg means more to you than any other Chicago Cub. Another age, Andre Dawson. I mean, you can go back quite a ways and you can pick that person that everybody aligned around. There are people to this day who feel like Chris Bryant is the Cub. There are people to this day who feel like Ernie Banks is the only Mr. Cub. Somewhere along the way, there's somebody who caught your attention. And when you align visions with that person, you use your knowledge of a specific point in time or place or context to create the connection. That is what it means to align visions. People always think, oh, if I write a book because I know that readers are clamoring for a vampire story, then I'm a sellout. But the truth is, you have themes right now ready to go, things you've been thinking about for decades. I have to assume if you're watching this, listening to this, you have things that you want to create that have a resonance and would fit thematically with a vampire story. So it's about you saying, okay, vampire stories sell right now. I want to get in front of more readers. I'm going to write the best damn vampire story out there that I know how to write. So I'm going to align my visions with the visions of the people out there. And that doesn't mean chasing a trend. It doesn't mean writing a superhero story because that's what everybody wants, but it might be a smart thing to do, especially when you're as mobile as you are right now. You're not listening to this podcast, you're not watching this YouTube live because you've made it. I'm not speaking to people who have made it because I don't know what it looks like to make it yet. I'm on this journey. I'm becoming a household name. But what I do know is that when I align my visions with the visions of people out there, when I speak the language that is being spoken right now, I achieve more notice. And then I can leverage those things and move people back toward me. So, what if I write a superhero book today? Because superheroes are super popular. People read the book, they love it, they look for more books by me. Now I get to have a conversation with them on my terms. Everything was on my terms, but one of them was me going out and finding them and pulling them in by speaking their language. Then I get to have my part of the conversation and say, well, you like superheroes, maybe you like detectives with magical elements in their world. There's nothing wrong with aligning your vision. There's also nothing wrong with doing that for your entire career. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have conversation on people's terms. There's nothing wrong with fan art. If you are really good at drawing all of the Pokemon characters and creating your own rich world of Pokemon, borrowing from an existing property, you're not a hack. You get to do what you love on your terms, but you align your visions to what people want. So those are the 5 things that I wanted to bring to you, that if you lean into those and you do those 5 things, you're going to increase your value. And the last thing I want to say to you is that value is subjective. Value is subjective. Worth is objective. I'm not going to go deep into explanation there because I'd like to leave you with something to think on and to ponder on. Value is subjective. What will the market pay for it? Those Jordans, those Air Jordans that you have, they have a certain value and they have a certain worth. The worth is in how they were constructed. The value is how they're valued. The value is how they're perceived. Thanks so much for getting with me this morning. And I hope that I provided you some value. If I did, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. I need to get better at asking for that early in the process, but it helps me out a ton. So if you like this video, you've watched this far, go ahead and hit the subscribe bell so you get notified every time I do this. And I will talk to you again very soon.